The waiting room smelled like coffee and bleach. I remember that detail because I had nothing else to hold on to. My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 49 years old. I drive a delivery truck for a furnishing company, 6 days a week, and until that Tuesday in October, my biggest worry was whether my knees would hold up until retirement. Then my phone rang at 2:47 in the afternoon. It was my wife, Rachel. Her voice was shaking. Dad collapsed at the store. They're taking him to St. Mary's. I got there before she did. I ran through the sliding doors, still wearing my work vest, my name tag crooked on my chest. A nurse pointed me toward a curtained bay in the ER, and there he was, Walter Hensley, my father-in-law, 71 years old, a man who had shaken my hand exactly once at my wedding, and never really again. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shirt was cut open. Wires ran from his chest to a machine that beeped in a rhythm I didn't like. His eyes found mine. "Daniel," he said. His voice was dry, like paper. "You came." "Of course I came, Walter. I want to explain something before I go further. Walter Hensley and I were never close. He built a construction business from nothing, worked with his hands for 40 years, and somewhere along the way, he decided that a man who drives a delivery truck wasn't good enough for his only daughter. He never said it outright. He didn't have to. It was in the way he looked past me at family dinners, in the way he introduced me to his friends as Rachel's husband instead of by name. But standing there, watching him struggle to breathe, none of that mattered anymore. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later with her brother Craig and her mother Diane. Diane went straight to Walter's side, gripping his hand, whispering something I couldn't hear. Craig stood near the door, arms crossed, checking his phone every few seconds. A doctor came in. Young, tired eyes. "Mr. Hensley had a cardiac event. We're running more tests, but we want to keep him overnight for observation, possibly longer." Diane's face went pale. "Overnight? I have the Rutherford wedding tomorrow. I'm the event coordinator. I can't just—" "Mom," Rachel said quietly. "I'm not saying I won't visit," Diane snapped. "I'm saying I have obligations." Craig didn't even look up from his phone. "I've got the Hendrickson deal closing Thursday. I can swing by this weekend." I stood there, stunned. Walter was lying in that bed, a tube taped to the back of his hand, his chest rising and falling like it cost him something, and his wife and son were already making plans to leave. Rachel caught my eye. She looked embarrassed but not surprised. This was who her family was. I was only now seeing it up close. I thought about all those Thanksgivings where Walter sat at the head of the table and talked about contracts and property values, while Diane nodded along, and Craig laughed at every joke his father made. I used to think that was closeness. Now I understood it was something else. Loyalty that only existed when it was convenient. By 6 that evening, Diane had left to handle a few things. She said she'd be back in the morning. Craig left an hour after her, promising to call. Rachel stayed as long as she could, but she had to pick up our daughter, Emma, from soccer practice, and I told her to go. Someone had to be there when Emma got off the field. "You don't have to stay, Daniel," Rachel said, pulling her coat on. "You've done enough today." "I'll stay a little longer," I said. "Somebody should." She looked at me for a long moment, like she wanted to say something more, then just nodded and left. So there I was. A son-in-law Walter Hensley barely tolerated, sitting alone in a hospital room with him, while his own wife and son were somewhere else, living their lives. The room got quiet, just the hum of the machines and the rain starting to hit the window. "You didn't have to stay," Walter said. His voice had gotten a little stronger, but it still had that rasp to it. "I know. Diane will be back tomorrow. I know that too." He turned his head toward me, slow, like it took effort. "Why did you stay, Daniel?" I thought about lying. I thought about saying something simple, something that wouldn't mean anything. Instead, I told him the truth. "Because somebody should be here, and because whatever you think of me, Rachel loves you, and I love Rachel. So that's enough of a reason." He didn't say anything for a while, just watched me. Then he looked up at the ceiling. 40 years I built that company," he said, mostly to himself. 40 years and my own son can't sit in a chair for one night." I didn't respond. It wasn't my place to agree or disagree. Around 9 o'clock, a nurse came in to check his vitals. While she worked, I noticed a small framed photo had fallen out of his jacket pocket, which was hanging on a hook by the door. I picked it up. It was an old picture, Walter, younger, maybe 35, standing in front of a half-built house with his arm around a boy who couldn't have been older than 8. Craig, I realized, before all the money, Before all the distance, I set it on the bedside table without a word. Walter glanced at it and looked away fast, like it hurt to see. The nurse finished and left. The room went quiet again. That's when he said it. "Daniel, come closer." I leaned in, thinking he needed water, or wanted the blanket adjusted. Instead, his hand, thin but still strong from decades of manual work, gripped my wrist. "I need you to do something for me," he whispered, "and I need you to do it tonight. Walter, you should rest. Tonight," he said again, sharper this time, though his voice stayed low. His eyes were clear. Whatever had happened to his heart, his mind was completely present. "Tomorrow morning, before Diane comes back, before Craig calls with some excuse, I need you to take me somewhere. You're not supposed to leave the hospital, Walter. You just had a—" "I know what I just had." His grip tightened. "I've built things my whole life, Daniel. Houses, a company, a family, or what I thought was one. And tonight I watched my wife walk out of this room to go plan somebody else's wedding, and my son leave to close a deal, while the man I never gave the time of day sat down in that chair and didn't move." He paused, breathing hard, like the words themselves cost him strength. "So here's what I need you to do," he said. "First thing tomorrow, before the doctors do their rounds, before Diane shows up with her coffee and her apologies, I need you to drive me to my lawyer." I stared at him. "Your lawyer? Walter, you need to be here. You need rest, tests, a cardiologist." "I need to change my will," he said, cutting me off. His eyes hadn't left mine. "Before I lose my nerve, before someone talks me out of it." The machine beside him beeped steadily, indifferent to the weight of what he'd just said. "Will you do it?" he asked. "Will you drive me?" I looked at this man, stubborn, proud, a man who had spent years making me feel small, now looking at me like I was the only person left he could trust. I didn't answer right away, because I knew that whatever I said next was going to change everything. For Rachel, for Diane, for Craig, for all of us. Outside, the rain kept falling against the window, steady, unhurried, like the world hadn't noticed yet what was about to happen inside that room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the vinyl chair beside Walter's bed until nearly midnight, replaying his words. "Drive me to my lawyer," a man who'd had a heart attack that same afternoon, asking me, the son-in-law he'd never fully accepted, to sneak him out before his own family returned. "Get some rest, Walter," I finally said. "We'll talk in the morning." 6 o'clock, he said, eyes already closing. "Before the shift change, before Diane." I didn't promise anything. I just nodded, because arguing with a man hooked up to a heart monitor felt cruel, and because some part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, was curious what would make him trust me with something this big. I got home around 1 in the morning. Rachel was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold in front of her. "How is he?" she asked, stable, talking, stubborn as ever. I sat down across from her. "Your mom didn't call," she texted, said she'd be there first thing. Rachel wrapped both hands around the mug. Craig texted too, said the same thing everybody always says. "This weekend." I watched her face. She wasn't surprised, and that told me more than anything Walter had said in that hospital room. This wasn't new. This was a pattern she'd lived inside her whole life, the same way I'd lived inside being underestimated. "Rachel," I said carefully, "has your dad ever talked to you about his will?" She looked up, frowning. "Why would you ask that?" "No reason. Just, hospitals make people think about things." She studied me a moment longer than I liked, but she let it go. "He's never talked about it. Not with me. Maybe with Craig. Craig's always been the one he confides in about the business." I thought about the man in that hospital bed gripping my wrist, telling me Craig hadn't visited in years without being asked twice, and I said nothing. I barely slept 2 hours. At 5:30, I was back in my truck, driving through a town still dark and wet from the night's rain, my headlights cutting through fog that hadn't lifted yet. Part of me hoped Walter had changed his mind. Part of me knew he hadn't. He was awake when I walked in, sitting up, already trying to unclip the monitor leads from his chest. "You came," he said, and for the first time I heard something in his voice that wasn't pride. It was relief. I said I would. "You didn't say that. You didn't say anything. I'm here, aren't I?" He almost smiled. Almost getting him out wasn't simple. I found a nurse, a woman named Priya, who'd been kind to him the night before, and I told her the truth, that Walter wanted to leave against medical advice for a few hours to handle urgent legal business, and that I'd have him back before noon. She wasn't happy about it. She made him sign a form releasing the hospital of responsibility, checked his vitals one more time, and warned him sternly that if he felt any chest pain, any dizziness, any shortness of breath, we were to call 911 immediately and not think twice. "Understood," Walter said, already reaching for his shoes. As I helped him into his jacket, the photograph fell out again. Walter and young Craig in front of the half-built house. He caught it this time before it hit the floor, and for a moment he just held it, thumb brushing over the boy's small face. "He used to hand me nails," Walter said quietly. "All day long. Wouldn't let me forget he was there. Wanted to be just like me." He tucked the photo carefully into his shirt pocket, over his heart. I don't know when that stopped. I didn't have an answer for him. I just helped him to the wheelchair the nurse insisted on, and we made our way to the parking garage. The drive across town was quiet. Walter stared out the window, watching storefronts and gas stations go by like he was trying to memorize them. 20 minutes in, he finally spoke. "You're wondering why I'm doing this?" "A little. My father left everything to my older brother," he said. "Because he showed up. Because he said the right things at the right times. I got the leftovers, and I spent my whole life proving I didn't need his money to build something real." He paused, and somewhere in all that proving, I think I became him, started measuring people by what they said instead of what they did. I kept my eyes on the road, letting him talk. "Craig says all the right things," Walter continued. "Always has. And Diane loves me, I know that. But love that only shows up when it's convenient isn't the kind of love that means anything when the roof caves in." He turned to look at me. "You never said the right things, Daniel. Not once in 15 years. But you were in that chair last night. That's worth more to me than every phone call Craig's ever made." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and he seemed to understand that silence was its own kind of answer. The law office was a small brick building downtown, the kind of place that had been there longer than the businesses around it. A secretary let us in early as a favor. Walter had apparently been a client for over 20 years, and within minutes we were sitting across from a lawyer named Gerald Owusu, a calm, precise man in his 60s who looked at Walter with genuine concern. "Walter, you look like you should be in a hospital bed." "I was. I will be again in a few hours. Right now I need you to draft something for me, and I need it done today." Gerald glanced at me, uncertain. Do you want privacy for this conversation?" Walter shook his head. "No, I want him to hear it, all of it." And that's when Walter Hensley began to lay out, piece by piece, exactly how he wanted his estate divided. The company, the properties, the accounts he'd built over 4 decades. As he spoke, I realized this wasn't a man reacting emotionally to one bad night in a hospital room. This was a man who had clearly been turning these thoughts over for a long time, maybe years, and the heart attack had simply been the push he needed to finally say them out loud. Gerald's pen moved steadily across his legal pad, but halfway through, he stopped writing and looked up. "Walter," he said slowly, "you understand what you're describing here is going to blindside your family. Diane, Craig especially. I understand exactly what it's going to do. And you're certain?" Walter's eyes moved to me, then back to Gerald. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," he said. "Draft it, all of it, and I want it finalized before I leave this office today." Gerald set down his pen and folded his hands. "There's something else you should know before we go further," he said carefully. "Something that happened 3 months ago that I think changes the shape of what you're asking for." Walter went very still. "What are you talking about, Gerald?" The lawyer glanced at me, then back at Walter, and lowered his voice. "Craig came to see me in July, alone. He didn't want you to know." The room went silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner in the corner. "What do you mean he came to see you?" Walter asked. His voice was quiet, but I could see his jaw tighten, the same way it had the night before when he talked about his son leaving to close a deal. Gerald hesitated, the way a man hesitates, when he knows the next sentence is going to break something. "Craig asked me about the company's ownership structure. Specifically, about a clause in your original partnership agreement from when you incorporated Hensley Construction back in the 90s. The buy-sell clause," Walter said slowly. "Yes, he wanted to know if there was a way to trigger an early transfer of majority shares, based on a medical incapacity determination." I felt my stomach drop, and I wasn't even the one it was happening to. "He wanted power of attorney," Walter said. "It wasn't a question. He wanted to know if it was possible," Gerald said carefully. "I told him it wasn't something I could discuss without your consent, and I told him I wouldn't be drafting anything like that. But Walter, I have to tell you, he didn't seem to be asking out of concern. He asked like a man planning ahead. Walter sat back in his chair. For a long moment he didn't say anything at all. Then he laughed, a short, bitter sound that had no humor in it. 3 months ago, he repeated. 3 months ago, my son was in this office asking how fast he could take my company from me. And last night he couldn't find 20 minutes to sit with me in a hospital room. Walter, I don't know his full intentions. I know his intentions, Gerald. Walter's hands were shaking now, not from illness, but from something closer to fury held on a short leash. I built that company with my hands, cinder block by cinder block, and my own son was in here measuring how close I was to being finished. I sat there, feeling like an intruder in a moment that wasn't mine, but Walter turned to me before I could excuse myself. You hear this, Daniel? This is the man Diane raves about at every dinner. This is the son who has obligations. Walter, I said carefully, maybe we should slow down. You just had a heart attack 12 hours ago. Making decisions like this right now while you're angry. I am not making this decision because I am angry, he snapped, and then, quieter, almost apologetic. I'm making it because for the first time in a long time I am finally seeing clearly. Gerald cleared his throat. There's a way to do this responsibly, Walter. We draft the new will. We also set up a trust structure that protects the business from being dismantled or sold off quickly, in case that's a concern. It gives you control while you're alive, and structure after you're gone. But I need you to understand, once this is signed, and once your family finds out, there's no quiet way through it. This will not be gentle. Nothing about my family has been gentle, Walter said. Draft it. For the next 2 hours, I sat in the corner of that office and listened to Walter Hensley rebuild his entire legacy from the ground up. The company would be restructured into a trust. Diane would keep the house and a generous stipend. Walter was firm about that. No matter what had happened, he said, she was still his wife of 43 years, and he wouldn't leave her without security. But the controlling interest in Hensley Construction, the properties, the majority of the estate, all of it would be redirected, some to Rachel, and to my shock, a portion held in trust for Emma, our daughter, to be released when she turned 25. Craig's name appeared exactly once in the entire document, tied to a small fixed inheritance, nothing more. Walter, I said quietly, when Gerald stepped out to print the drafts, are you sure about this? Once he finds out, he'll be angry, Walter said. He'll say I've lost my mind. He'll say the hospital rattled something loose in my brain. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real exhaustion behind his eyes. Not physical, but the kind that comes from finally admitting something to yourself that you've avoided for years. Let him say it. I know exactly what I'm doing. We got back to St. Mary's just before noon, exactly as I'd promised the nurse. Walter was pale and clearly worn out from the morning, but he insisted on walking back into his room under his own strength. I'd barely gotten him settled into bed when the door swung open. Deanne stood there, coffee in hand, coat still on. Her eyes went from Walter to me to the faint hospital wristband still hanging loose where he'd nearly pulled it off. Where were you? She asked. I called the nurses' station. They said you left the building, against medical advice, with Daniel. Walter didn't flinch. I had business to take care of. Business. Walter, you had a heart attack yesterday. I'm aware. Diane's eyes cut to me, sharp and accusing. You took him somewhere? Without calling me? Without calling Craig? He asked me to, I said evenly. I wasn't going to say no to him. You're not his son, she snapped. You don't get to make decisions like this. The words landed exactly where she meant them to. 15 years of feeling like an outsider in that family compressed into one sentence. No, Walter said before I could respond. His voice cut through the room like a blade. He's not my son. My son couldn't sit in a chair for one night. Daniel didn't leave my side. Diane's face went through several emotions at once. Confusion, hurt, and something that looked almost like fear. What is that supposed to mean? It means things are going to look different from here on out, Walter said. I met with Gerald this morning. The coffee cup in Diane's hand trembled, just slightly. Gerald Owusu? Walter, what did you do? Before he could answer, the door opened again. Craig walked in, phone in one hand, a small gift bag in the other. The kind you grab at a hospital gift shop on your way up. An afterthought wrapped in tissue paper. Dad, hey, I got here as soon as I could, he said. All easy confidence, like the last 18 hours hadn't happened the way they had. Traffic was a nightmare. How are you feeling? Walter looked at his son for a long moment. Long enough that even Craig's easy smile started to falter. Sit down. Craig? Walter said quietly. There's something we need to discuss, all of us. Craig's smile disappeared entirely. His eyes flicked to Gerald's business card, still sitting on the rolling table beside Walter's bed, and something shifted in his expression. A flicker of recognition, and beneath it something closer to panic. Dad, he said slowly, what did you sign? The room felt smaller than it was. 4 people, 1 hospital bed, and a silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls. What did you sign? Craig said again. And this time it wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed up as one. I didn't sign anything yet, Walter said calmly. I met with Gerald this morning to discuss changes to my estate. The documents are being finalized. I'll sign them by the end of the week. Changes, Craig repeated. He set the gift bag down on the chair, slow and deliberate, like he needed his hands to do something other than shake. What kind of changes? Walter looked at his son for a long moment, and I watched something pass over his face. Not anger anymore, but something closer to sorrow, the look of a man about to close a door he'd kept open far longer than he should have. I know about July, Craig. The color drained out of Craig's face so fast I actually saw it happen. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Gerald told me about the buy-sell clause, about you asking how quickly you could take control of the company if I was declared incapacitated. Dad, that's not. Craig started again. I was being practical. You're 71. You work 60-hour weeks still. Somebody in this family has to think about what happens if something goes wrong. Something did go wrong, Walter said. Yesterday, and you didn't come. I had a closing, you had a closing. Walter's voice rose for the first time, sharp enough that Diane flinched. Your father was in an emergency room with tubes in his arm, and you had a closing. But 3 months ago, you had time to sit in a lawyer's office and ask how fast you could take my company away from me. Diane set her coffee down on the windowsill, her hands no longer steady. Craig, tell me that isn't true. Mom, it's not what it sounds like. Then tell me what it sounds like, she said. And for the first time since I'd known her, I heard real fear in Diane's voice. Not for herself, for the family she'd spent 40 years believing was solid ground. Craig ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I was protecting the business. If something happened to Dad suddenly, without a plan in place, the company could get tied up in probate for a year, maybe more. Contracts fall apart. Employees leave. I was trying to protect what he built. You were trying to protect it from me, Walter said quietly. While I was still standing, nobody spoke for a moment. Outside the door, a cart rattled by in the hallway, someone's lunch tray, oblivious to the wreckage happening in room 214. So what? Craig finally said, his voice hardening, defensive now instead of apologetic. You're cutting me out? Over one conversation with a lawyer that never even went anywhere, because Daniel drove you around this morning like some kind of hero? This isn't about Daniel. It's exactly about Daniel. Craig turned toward me, and for the first time in 15 years he looked at me directly, really looked at me, like I'd suddenly become visible. You've been in this family, what, 15 years? And after one night in a hospital chair, you're what, the golden son now? You don't even know this family. You don't know what it took to build what he built. I know what I saw last night, I said, keeping my voice level, and what I didn't see. Craig's jaw tightened. Nobody asked for your opinion. Enough, Walter said, and the word landed with the same authority I imagined he'd used for 40 years on job sites, a voice that had settled arguments between grown men holding power tools. Craig, I am not cutting you off entirely. You'll still have something. But the company, the thing I built with my own hands while your grandfather told me I'd amount to nothing, that is not going to a son who was already measuring me for a coffin 3 months before I needed one. Craig opened his mouth, then closed it. Something in Walter's tone had finally gotten through. Dad, he said, quieter now, I made a mistake asking Gerald those questions. I'll admit that, but you're punishing me for one conversation and rewarding him. He jabbed a finger toward me. For one night in a chair. That's not fair, that's not who you are. You're right, Walter said. It's not one night, and it's not one conversation. It's 15 years of one man showing up, and one conversation that revealed exactly what my own son has been thinking the whole time he smiled at my dinner table. Diane sank into the chair by the window, her face pale, staring at her son like she was seeing him for the first time. "Craig, how could you not tell me?" "Because I knew how it would sound," Craig said, and for the first time, his voice cracked, just slightly. "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You went behind your father's back. I was trying to protect this family by planning to take everything before he'd even died." Diane's voice broke on the last word, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. The machines beside Walter's beeped steadily. Through all of it, indifferent. The only calm thing in the room. A nurse knocked and stepped in, sensing the tension the moment she crossed the threshold. "Mr. Hensley, your blood pressure's elevated. I need everyone to give him some quiet, please." Craig didn't move right away. He looked at his father, and for a moment something raw passed across his face. Not anger, but something closer to grief, like he was watching a version of his future disappear in real time. "You're really doing this," he said. "Over money." "It was never about money," Walter said, his voice suddenly tired. "It was about who showed up. That's all it was ever about." Craig grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair, leaving the gift bag behind untouched. "I need some air." He left without another word. Diane, torn between her husband and her son, hovered near the door for a moment, then followed him out, glancing back at Walter with an expression I couldn't quite read. Love, maybe, tangled up with something that looked almost like betrayal. And then it was just me and Walter again. The same as the night before, the room settling back into that steady rhythm of beeping machines and rain against the window. "You didn't have to say all that," I said quietly, once the door had closed. "Yes, I did," Walter said. He was staring at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling slower now, calmer. "I've been saying the easy things for years, Daniel. Last night, in that empty room, I finally understood what it cost me." He turned his head toward me, and there was something different in his eyes now, not the pride I'd grown used to, but something closer to gratitude, worn and unfamiliar on his face. "There's one more thing," he said. "Something I didn't tell Gerald this morning. Something I need to tell you before Rachel gets here." "What is it, Walter?" He took a slow breath, like he was gathering the strength to say something he'd been carrying a long time. "It's about your father-in-law's construction company," he said. "And a mistake I made 20 years ago that's about to come due. One that has nothing to do with Craig, and everything to do with why I really need someone I can trust." I pulled the chair closer to the bed. "What kind of mistake, Walter?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on some point on the ceiling, like he was deciding how far back to start. 20 years ago, when I was building the company up, I brought in a partner, a man named Russell Doyle. We split ownership 50-50 on a handful of properties we developed together. Strip malls, mostly, out past the highway. Russell handled the financing side. I handled the building. He paused. "Russell died 6 years ago. Heart attack, same as almost happened to me. His half of those properties went to his daughter, Melissa. She's never had anything to do with the business, lives out of state. But legally, she still owns 40% of 3 properties that generate real income every month." "Okay," I said slowly. "So what's the problem?" "The problem is that the partnership agreement Russell and I signed has a clause neither of us thought would ever matter. If either partner becomes incapacitated or dies without updated instructions on file, the surviving partner's family can petition to force a full buyout, at whatever valuation a court decides, not what the properties are actually worth. If I go into this hospital stay and something happens, and Melissa's lawyers move fast, my estate could be forced to sell those properties for a fraction of their value, just to satisfy a technicality nobody's thought about in 15 years. And Craig knew about this." "Craig knew about this," Walter confirmed. "It's part of why I think he went to Gerald in July. Not just to ask about taking control, to ask what would happen to those specific properties if I wasn't around to manage them. Whether he could get in front of Melissa's lawyers first, buy her out cheap, and control everything before anyone else even understood what was happening." I sat back, letting that settle. So this whole time, he wasn't just impatient. He was trying to get ahead of something real. "Doesn't excuse how he went about it," Walter said, "but it does explain it." He looked at me, steady now, some of the fire from earlier replaced with something more practical. "I need someone to go through those old partnership documents with Gerald this week. Someone I trust not to have their own angle. I want to update the agreement properly, buy Melissa out fairly, close the loophole before it becomes a weapon in anyone's hands. including Craig's, if he decides to come after this after I'm gone. Why me, Walter? Rachel would. Rachel has Emma, and a job, and enough on her plate without me adding legal paperwork to it. And I don't trust Diane not to tell Craig everything the second he apologizes to her, because she will forgive him, Daniel. She always does. That's not weakness. That's just who she is, he exhaled slowly. You're the only person in this family who's never asked me for anything, not once. 15 years, and you never once asked me for a dime, a favor, a connection. That's rare. That's worth more to me than blood. Some days. I didn't know what to say to that. 15 years of feeling like the outsider at every holiday table, and it turned out the old man had been watching the whole time, just never said so. I'll do it, I said. Whatever you need. Over the next 3 days, while Walter stayed under observation and slowly improved, I met with Gerald twice to go through the old partnership paperwork. It was tedious, dense with legal language, but Gerald was patient, walking me through every clause. We tracked down Melissa Doyle's contact information and set up a call. She turned out to be nothing like what I'd braced for. A soft-spoken schoolteacher in Ohio who had no idea her father's old business dealings were even a live issue. Nobody's ever explained any of this to me, she admitted on the phone. I just get a check every quarter. I didn't know there was a clause like that. We worked out a fair buyout over the following weeks, one that respected what her father had built without punishing Walter's estate. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a courtroom fight. It was two families doing the quiet, unglamorous work of fixing something before it broke. Walter was discharged 8 days after his heart attack, weaker than before but steady on his feet. Rachel picked him up and I met them at the house, where Diane had prepared a small dinner. Quiet, careful, everyone still finding their footing after the week that had cracked something open in all of us. Craig didn't come. He hadn't spoken to Walter since walking out of that hospital room, and Diane's eyes stayed red-rimmed through most of dinner, though she tried to hide it behind conversation about Emma's soccer season and the weather turning colder. It was almost 3 weeks before Craig called the house. I wasn't there for that conversation, but Rachel told me about it later. How Walter had listened for a long time without saying much. How Craig had apologized, not perfectly, not completely, but honestly, in a way that suggested he understood, finally, what he'd almost lost. He's not getting the company back, Walter told me afterward, the two of us sitting on his back porch on a cold Saturday afternoon, coffee steaming between us. That decision stands, but he's still my son. I told him he could come by Sundays if he wanted. Start over from there. Slow, that's fair, I said. It's more than fair, Walter said. It's more than my father ever gave me a chance to do. 6 months passed. The trust was finalized. Hensley Construction was restructured, with Rachel taking on a role managing the business side, something she turned out to have a real talent for, a talent Walter admitted. He should have noticed years earlier if he hadn't been so fixed on seeing his company only through his son's eyes. Emma's trust was set, waiting quietly for a future she didn't even know was already being built for her. Craig did come by on Sundays, at first stiff and formal, then slowly, over the months, something closer to real. He and Walter never fully rebuilt what had cracked, but they built something, smaller, more honest, without the assumptions either of them used to carry into every conversation. As for me, Walter started calling just to talk. Not about business, not about favors. Sometimes about nothing at all. A game on TV, a job site he used to work on decades ago, questions about my own father, who'd passed when I was 22 and never got the chance to see the life I built. One Sunday evening, as I was helping him fix a gutter on the side of his house, he stopped, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked at me for a long moment. I spent 15 years underestimating you, he said, judging you by a job instead of a character. That's on me, not you. You don't have to say that, Walter. Yes, I do, he said. A man should say the true things out loud while he still has the chance to. I learned that lesson the hard way, lying in that hospital bed, watching who stayed and who didn't. He held out his hand, the same hand that had gripped my wrist that first night in the hospital, desperate and afraid. This time there was nothing desperate in it, just steady respect, freely given. I shook it later that year. At Emma's 13th birthday party, I found Walter sitting quietly at the edge of the yard, looking at an old photograph he'd had reframed, the one of him and young Craig in front of that half-built house. Beside it, on the same small table, sat a newer photograph. Me in my work vest sitting in a hospital chair beside his bed, taken by a nurse who'd found the moment worth capturing. Two different kinds of family, he said, when he noticed me looking. Both mine, both worth something, in the end. I sat down next to him, and for a while, neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. Some men build houses their whole lives, and never once stop to ask who's actually standing beside them when the walls start to shake. Walter Hensley almost made that mistake. But in the end, in a quiet hospital room nobody else wanted to sit in, he found out exactly who he could trust, and it changed everything that came after.